So you may have experienced a kundalini awakening or a spontaneous awakening, and for a moment, everything would have felt clear. There may have been peace, openness, even bliss. But then it faded. Old patterns started coming back. Your energy feels unstable. You might feel heavier, more emotional, more dense, or maybe even more confused than before. And nothing seems to work the way that it did at the start. Now, this isn't you backsliding, and it doesn't mean that your awakening has stopped or that you've done something wrong. It just means that you've entered a phase that almost nobody on the internet explains. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through what actually happens after your awakening, why these symptoms begin to arise, and how to relate to them in a way that supports integration instead of panic. Now, I'm Jamie, and I had a spontaneous kundalini awakening over a decade ago. And I had no framework to be able to understand it and no path to follow. And that was until I met my teacher, and I spent over a decade in yogic training with him. Heck, I even lived as a monk for a little while. And I've spent a lot of time scrolling through spiritual YouTube, having a look at spiritual Reddit, and unfortunately I'm finding a lot of people getting lost and confused because they're taking a DIY approach to their path. And with my teacher, I was taught a step-by-step path for our awakening journey, and it's not only worked for me, it's worked for hundreds of my clients too. And now my attempt is to impart all of the things that I've learned to you here. So, your awakening doesn't really remove your karma, it exposes it. So you may be asking yourself, if my awakening was real, why does life feel harder for me now? Most people expect awakening to resolve their suffering, but what they're not prepared for is what happens after the initial experience. Now, your awakening definitely gives you a glimpse of freedom. Remember that feeling of bliss? But it's not the finished state. What was previously unconscious to us now becomes very visible and very active in our system. Patterns that were dormant or bypassed begin surfacing. And without a little bit of context around what's going on, this can start to feel like a move backwards, like a regression or a failure on the path. So what you have to understand is an awakening experience, it doesn't erase our conditioning. It just brings it up to the surface so that it can be seen, felt, and gradually integrated step by step. Now, this process is often messy, slow, and deeply disorienting, especially if you don't understand what's happening. Now, something to note here. Old behaviors returning doesn't mean that you're going backwards, because you might be noticing old habits creeping back in: emotional eating, distraction, addictive tendencies, emotional volatility, and it all comes on so strong, so fast. Now that can be terrifying, especially when you thought you'd moved past all of this. See, these patterns haven't just come up out of thin air, they were always within you. The nervous system releases stored stress and stored conditioning as we have more energy in the system after an awakening experience. And when that happens, the tendency to seek comfort is very, very strong. Now, when our nervous system and our energetic capacity increases, deeper material becomes available. And for this, we use sadhana. And if it isn't already, you can now access that for free on my channel. So give that a go and let me know how that helps. Now, without deeper understanding, we tend to judge ourselves very harshly in this phase or try and force change through that self-judgment that actually only reinforces the patterns and the tendencies within you. So what you need to know is just this. This isn't the old you returning, but it is old material becoming available to be integrated, which is good for us to know. See, the danger isn't the patterns themselves, it's interpreting it as something going wrong, or that you're bad, or that God hates you, because sometimes the spiritual ego will convince us of that. But it's none of these things. It's just our old karma running off. But as that old karma does run off, if we get identified with every single thing, which you might, then the identity begins to reassert itself very, very quietly. After an awakening, many people assume the ego is gone. It isn't. Our identity doesn't just disappear overnight, or doesn't just disappear because we have a huge rush of energy in the system. And it often comes back in subtler, more convincing forms. Old coping strategies can quietly reestablish themselves, can't they? And this is essentially what our identity is. Just coping strategies with life that we've learned from our parents and through the bullying that we've experienced. It's conditioned. Now, the risk here is falling asleep again. by not understanding the subtle mechanics of our ego and how it's operating. So we don't even know that we're in it, you see? So this phase really asks us for honesty. Can I get honest with ourselves? It's not about transcendence at all, because you're being shown where your identity still operates if you have the awareness to be able to see it. Not so that it can be destroyed, but so that it can be seen clearly and no longer unconsciously run your life. So here's why structure matters now more than ever. When everything feels unstable, the instinct is to either push harder or give up completely, but neither helps. Because having an awakening experience has a tendency to rattle the familiar reference points inside of ourselves, doesn't it? And without structure, the nervous system defaults to our survival patterns like we were talking about earlier. And this is partially why we're not free yet. Now, these are the masks that we have throughout our life used as a form of protection. We put them on to protect ourselves, which is essentially what our identity is there for. But spiritual insight alone, or an experience alone, it doesn't regulate the body. So without something consistent, people's minds can go a little bit wonky. We can chase peak states thinking that that's the goal, or even worse, just go back to our old ways because we crave certainty so deeply. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, boy, what a waste. So this is where a grounded, stabilizing practice matters. Not to achieve anything, but to open up the potentiality for peace so that you have something steady to continually return to inside of yourself that isn't as shaky as the mind. So I just want to draw on my own journey and pull out some mistakes that I made and what actually then helped. Because this phase, it almost took me out. I spent a long time chasing the initial high, a few years, actually. And I treated integration as a problem to solve instead of a process to live. And I thought to myself, if I'm not perfect, there's no way I can be spiritual. But perfection doesn't happen like that. And what even is it? Because one man's version of perfection is definitely not the same as yours, is it? Until I realized, I think actually I'm just going to have to move through all of this stuff inside of myself and integrate. And that became a process for my life. So the mistake I was making was not recognizing, this is actually a lifelong lived thing, and I have to get into the process rather than avoiding it. See, because the more I chased the highs or the more I tried to be perfect, the more tight I got around this path. And that's not spirituality at all. So what helped wasn't another experience, although some of them came. It was learning how to come deeper into stillness and begin living and moving from there and meeting the stuff that would come up within that. So things didn't stabilize because I figured it out or became perfect or suddenly was enlightened in my old identity's version of thinking about what enlightenment would be, which would probably just be some pseudo-enlightenment. But they actually stabilized because I stopped chasing and learned how to meet what was here, slowly, consistently, and with guidance. So if you're in this phase and you're a little bit upset that your first Kundalini awakening didn't lead to freedom, then just know nothing's gone wrong. But what is required from you is a different relationship to the path. Now, this is the integration phase, and it's where most people either get lost or they finally ground what awakened inside of them. Now, if you want support or structure, practice, and live guidance through this phase, that's the work I do. And if not, let this at least give you some context so that you stop assuming something is wrong with you when it isn't. So now that you know that the reason you aren't free after your first awakening experience is because there's a storehouse of karma that has to come up to be integrated, perhaps you want to know how long that type of integration will take. Well, if you do, you can watch this video right here, and I'm going to explain why most timelines for our awakening are completely wrong and how long is this process actually going to take. So if you're interested in that, then you can just press that button right there.